Greetings everyone, welcome back to the economics revision class. Objectives. The objectives are helping students to revise key concepts of Chapter 2 of Grade 11 Economics, helping students answer frequently asked final Grade 12 questions, and helping students to familiarize themselves to quickest ways of solving problems. So now let's turn to Chapter 2, which is topic on demand, supply, and elasticity. Let's start the revision by defining demand. So what's demand? Demand is a desire, willingness, and ability to buy a good or service. Demand can refer to one individual consumer or to the total demand of consumers in the market, and we call this as market demand. And demand schedule is a table that lists the various quantities of a product or service that someone is willing to buy over a range of possible prices. The demand graph lists price on the vertical axis or on the y-axis and quantity demanded on the horizontal axis or on the x-axis. Each point on a graph shows how many units of a product or service individual will buy at a particular price. The demand curve is a line that connects these points. And also the demand curve is downward sloping or has a negative slope, because people are normally willing to buy less of a product at a higher price and more at a lower price. So according to the law of demand, all things being equal, quantity demanded and price move in opposite direction. In other words, we have an inverse relationship between quantity demanded and price. And here you can see the demand curve, which is a downward sloping curve, and it has a negative relationship between price and quantity demanded. Now let's turn to movement along a demand curve. So change in the quantity demanded due to price change causes movement along a demand curve. So only when the price of a good changes, there is a movement along the demand curve. For example, when the price of a good rises, the quantity demanded decreases, and you can see clearly from the arrows. And as the price falls, the quantity demand also rises. And these two examples shows us we can only move along a demand curve if the price of a commodity changes. The demand curve can shift because of the following factors. The first factor is number of buyers or number of consumers. The second factor is income, that's the income of consumers. Third factor is taste and preference. The fourth factor is expectation, and this is what consumers expect what will happen in the future. It could be future price or the future state of the economy. And the last shift factor is related goods, which are complements and substitutes. So by complements, we mean goods which are consumed together. The best examples are pen and ink. Examples of substitute goods are Pepsi and Coca-Cola. So this we can also call them rival goods. Demonstrate the shift of a demand curve using a diagram. So if we pick one of the shift factors, so let's say the income of consumers rises, so consumers demand more of a good. So as a result of this, the demand curve shifts to the right or outward. Now let's turn to a decrease in demand curve or a shift in leftward. So if we pick, let's say, income of consumers, and if the income of consumers decline, consumers cannot afford to buy many goods. As a result, they decrease their demand. So the result of this will be a shift of the demand curve to the left or inward shift. Now let's turn to supply. What's supply? Supply refers to the various quantities of goods or services that producers are willing to sell at all possible market prices. Supply can refer to the output of one producer to the total output of all producers in the market, and we call this as market supply. A supply schedule is a table that shows the quantity producers are willing to supply at various prices. And when we come to the graph of the supply curve, the graph lists price on the vertical axis or on the y-axis, and quantity is supplied on the horizontal axis or on the x-axis. So each point on the graph shows how many units of the product or service a producer or group of producers will be willing to sell at a particular price. So the supply curve has a positive slope, meaning price and quantity supplied are directly proportional. As the price increases, quantity supply also increases. Or in other hand, if the price declines, producers will supply less of a good. So you can see the supply curve from the graph. It shows a direct relationship between price and quantity. So now let's turn to law of supply. So the law of supply says that producers will normally offer more of a good for sale at a higher price and less of a good at a lower price. Like the demand curve, the supply curve can also shift in response to the following factors. The first factor as subsidies and taxes. So subsidy means what the government pays for selected producers to encourage them to produce more at a given market price. Taxes, of course, everyone knows that, but every producer has to pay tax. So whether a firm or a producer gets subsidy or tax, it will have a direct impact on how much quantities they are willing to supply. The second shift factor is technology, and as technology improves, producers are able to produce more of a good, and with poor technology they can not also produce so many goods. The third factor is number of sellers, and this how many firms are in the market. And the fourth one is expectation. Thus, business consider future price and economic conditions. For example, if the economy is expected to be in a recession, that's a decline in output, firms will not be able to supply more of their good in the future. Also, if they expect that the economy will improve or will boom, then they will start or expect to produce a lot of good in the future. The last factor is cost of production. These are cost of raw materials. So as the cost of production rises, it will be costly to produce goods and services. So as a result of this, producers will cut back their production. So now let's demonstrate the shift of supply curve using diagram. So as we pick one shift factor, let's say technology. As technology improves, then suppliers will produce more. As a result of this, the supply curve shifts to the right, as you can see from the diagram. On the other hand, let's say technology is poor or is not improving, then this will have a negative impact on the supply. So as a result of this, suppliers will lower their production, and the final result of this will be a shift to the right, and the supply curve to shift to the right, as we can see from the diagram. So now we have looked at demand, supply, and their characteristics. Now let's put everything together. So now let's turn to equilibrium. So equilibrium is a point where the demand and supply are equal. So at this point, both buyers and suppliers agreed upon the same price, and this price is called market price. They also agreed upon the same quantity, and this quantity is called market quantity. For example, as we see from the table below, the equilibrium price is $3 and the equilibrium quantity is 30 units. Why $3? Because at the price of $3, both the quantity demanded and quantity supplied are both 30, or they are both equal. Graphically, equilibrium is a point where the demand and supply curve crosses. As you can see from the diagram, the point where they cross is called equilibrium. And if we go to the price axis or the y-axis, that price is called market price or equilibrium price. If we go to the x-axis or the quantity axis, that quantity is called equilibrium quantity. So the next things we're going to look at is surplus, equilibrium, and shortage. What's surplus? This is a condition where quantity demanded is less than quantity supplied. In other words, producers will produce a lot of good, meanwhile demanders will demand less of what they actually need. So in other words, quantity supplied exceeds quantity demanded. Equilibrium, as we previously said, is a point where quantity demanded and quantity supplied are equal. The last one is shortage. This is a condition where quantity demanded is greater than quantity supplied. In other words, what consumers need is way less than what suppliers are willing to supply at a market price. So graphically, we can express shortage and surplus as follows. So surplus is here on the diagram, the gap between quantity supplied and quantity demanded, and shortage is the one we see below, where the quantity demanded is way less than quantity supplied. Now let's turn to price ceiling and price floor. These terms are often confusing, and we need to clarify them very carefully. So a government may in some situations set a legal maximum price for a particular good. This is called price ceiling. So remember, the price ceiling is set below. So remember the word below. It's set below the equilibrium price, and this causes shortage in the market. So look at the diagram. A price ceiling is set below the equilibrium price, and this causes shortage. A legally set minimum price is called price floor. The price that can be legally charged by sellers of the good must not be lower than the price floor. Price floor is set above equilibrium price. So remember the term above. And this causes surplus in the market, as you can see from the diagram. Now let's turn to the concept of elasticity. We have so many elasticity concepts and formula, but first let's start with the concept of elasticity of demand. So this refers to the degree of responsiveness of quantity demanded of a good commodity to change in any of its determinants, such as price and income. When we come to price elasticity of demand, or in abbreviation we call it as EP, it measures the ratio of percentage change in quantity demanded of a good to a given percentage change in its price. So the determinants of price elasticity of demand are: number 1, availability of substitutes; number 2, nature of commodity; number 3, proportion of income spent; number 4, the number of uses of a commodity; number 5, time factor; number 6, postponement of consumption. For example, if we pick availability of substitutes, let's pick a market for Coca-Cola. If Coca-Cola has so many substitutes, then as the price of Coca-Cola goes up, then consumers will switch their consumption to a different good. And this makes the price elasticity of demand for Coca-Cola product very elastic. So the numerical value of price elasticity of demand range from 0 to infinity. Degree of price elasticity of demand is expressed in terms of 5 types. The first type is zero elasticity. So here EP is equal to 0. There is infinite elasticity. Here EP is equal to infinity. There is unitary elasticity where EP becomes equal to 1, and there is greater than unitary elasticity where EP is greater than 0, and there is less unitary elasticity. Here EP is less than 0. Now let's turn to income elasticity. So income elasticity measures the responsiveness of demand for a commodity to change in the income of the consumer. Income elasticity of demand is positive in case of normal goods and is negative in case of inferior goods. So income elasticity of demand, I'm going to abbreviate it as YED. So the formula of YED is percentage change in quantity demanded of good X divided by percentage change in income. Now let's turn to cross elasticity. Cross elasticity measures the responsiveness of demand for a commodity to a change in the price of a related commodity. Cross elasticity is positive in case of substitute goods and negative in case of complementary goods. The price and cross elasticity of demand formula are below. So price elasticity of demand, I'm going to abbreviate it as PED. So PED is equal to percentage change in quantity of a good X demanded divided by percentage change in price of good. So the cross elasticity of demand, which I'm going to abbreviate it as XED, is equal to percentage change in quantity demanded of good X divided by percentage change in price of good Y. Now let's look at examples of elasticity calculations. So the first example is as follows. Suppose consumers buy 600 DVD players when the price of the good is $255 per unit, and they buy 5,000 DVD players when the price is $300. So the question is calculate the price elasticity of the good, or the PED. So we start working on our solution by putting the formula. So remember, the formula for PED is the percentage change in quantity demanded divided by the percentage change of price. So the percentage in quantity demanded is 6,000 minus 5,000 divided by 5,000, and we divide this by percentage change in price, which is 255 minus 300 divided by 300. So if we simplify this fraction, we arrive at 0.2 divided by negative 0.15, and the final answer will be negative 1.33 or 1.33. So here the negative sign shows us the inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. So you can either leave our answer in negative terms or in absolute terms. Second example, suppose the price of coffee increases from $10 per kilogram to $12 per kilogram, and the amount of tea purchased increases from 1,500 kilogram to 1,650 kilogram. So the question is, what's the cross elasticity of demand of the good? So remember, we are asked to calculate cross elasticity. We have two different goods, coffee and tea. So remember, the formula for XED is percentage change in quantity X divided by percentage change in price of Y. So remember, X and Y, what they stand for. So by taking the numbers, so XED will be 150 divided by 1,500 all over 2 divided by 10, and the final answer would be positive 0.5. So here XED is positive 0.5, meaning the positive sign tells us that coffee and tea are substitutes. Finally, let's look at price elasticity of supply. So the price elasticity of supply is a measure of the responsiveness of a quantity of a good supplied to change in its price. So PES, which stands for price elasticity of supply, is calculated along a given supply curve. In general, if there is a large responsiveness of quantity supplied to change in price, supply is referred to as being elastic. And if the other way happens, supply is termed as inelastic. So the determinants of elasticity of supply are the following. The first one is cost of production. Second one is time factor. Third is nature of commodity. Number 4 is availability of facilities for expanding output. Fifth one is nature of input. Next one is risk taking. And the last one is expectation of future prices. So now let's turn to the formula for price elasticity of supply, which is PES. So PES is equal to percentage change in quantity of good X supplied divided by percentage change in price of X. So we have summarized the key concepts of the grade 11 economics chapter 2, which were in the areas of demand, supply, equilibrium, and elasticity. Now let's look at 5 sample questions. Question 1. So question 1 says, which of the following is assumed constant along the demand curve for gasoline? A, the price of gasoline and the price of related goods. B, the price of gasoline, buyers' incomes and test. C, all variables affecting demand other than the price of gasoline. D, all variables affecting demand and other than supply of gasoline. The answer is C, because when we define the law of demand, everything else is kept constant except the price of that good. Question 2. If buyers expect the price of a good to rise in the future, the result is A, a decrease in supply today. B, an increase in supply today. C, a decrease in quantity demanded today. D, an increase in demand today. The answer is D, which is an increase in demand today. Because when consumers expect the price to rise in the future, they start buying a lot of the good today. That's the reason. Question 3. An excess supply of rice in a competitive market would indicate that A, the current price exceeds the kilogram price. B, buyers want to purchase more rice at current price than the sellers want to sell. C, the market will not be able to approach equilibrium. D, the entire supply curve must shift to the left in order to attain equilibrium. The answer is A. Number 4. Look at the diagram above and answer this question. So the question says, a movement from point G to point H would represent A, a change in demand. B, the impact of decrease in the price of substitute goods. C, higher price for the inputs used to produce this good. D, a change in demand plus a change in quantity demanded. The answer is A, because a movement from G to H would represent a change in demand. We looked at how the demand curve can shift because of the above 5 reasons, which are income, taste and preference, and so on. Question 5. If a supply curve is vertical straight line, the value of elasticity of supply is A, infinity. B, less than 1. C, greater than 1. D, equal to 0. The answer is equal to 0, which is D. So let's put everything together. We have looked at demand, we have looked at supply, we have looked at equilibrium, and we have looked at elasticity. So remember, the demand curve is negatively sloped, meaning that price and quantity demanded are negatively related. And also remember that the supply curve is positively sloped, meaning that quantity, supply, and price are directly proportional. If we bring the demand curve and supply curve, the point where the two crosses is called equilibrium point. So at that equilibrium point, both buyers and suppliers agree upon the same market price, and that price is called market price. Also remember, elasticity shows or tells us degree of responsiveness of one variable to change in price or income and so on. In other words, if a variable is responsive, then that variable is inelastic in regards to the factors that we currently look at. I have wrapped up my presentation. I hope the revision was helpful, and I hope you do well in your final exam. Until next time, goodbye.